Just to introduce myself, as you see up on the screen, my name's Charles Burkett. I'm the Northern Territory Divisional Advisory Board Chairman, born and bred in Darwin, and was gifted with this workshop because I think it's quite a significant one in regards to innovation. And having sat there for the last day and a half during the summit and the board meeting, national board meeting that we had on Thursday morning, it is front and centre in regards to this topic. It's as you'll see in the program. I'm not going to read through that, but you can see how significant innovation is going to play for this organisation. We're celebrating 100 years, and there's been quite a lot of conversation about what happens in the next 10, 30, 100 years and how we sit. Just to touch on that, just going back to basics, with simple Google, innovation generally refers to changing or creating more effective processes, products and ideas, and can increase the likelihood of how an organisation succeeds, or even more importantly in our case, be the catalyst to help us adapt and grow in the marketplace, which is what we exist in. It's interesting, like I said, the last day and a half, the common theme that besides the buzzword collaborative, the common theme throughout the last day and a half has been about innovation. Throughout yesterday's sessions, especially the panel discussion later yesterday afternoon on youth engagement, where Julie McCrossan, through her vibrancy and lively facilitating, actually frequently showed from the youth how much innovation, the importance of it, although she didn't have to abstract it too much from the youth. It was just at the front and centre with their mind. And then obviously this morning with Eve, the Director General from the ICRC, just to make some quotes there, which he said in regards to us being seen as a service provider, we need to rethink the way we engage with our beneficiaries and radically change and think the way we engage with those beneficiaries. They're pretty strong words, and the other thing I picked up, which don't take it too much out of context, but he did say that people are not willing to give their time, probably, which I'll add to that. What he said is to what they were used to. So we need to think about how we approach our beneficiaries who are still willing to volunteer and participate in organisations such as Australian Red Cross. So it's exceptionally sound to have the four quality speakers and presenters on the panel that we have here today. And there's Dr. You just put your hand up so they don't know which one. Dr. Nicholas Gruen is the CEO of Lateral Economics. Ms. Rebecca Scott, CEO of Street. Mr. Peter Walton, who's the editor of International Program for the Australian Red Cross, and Dr. Andrew Young, the CEO, Centre for Social Impact. The format we're going to follow is they're going to make a presentation in the order of what's on the screen, and then we'll sit down for a panel discussion, and obviously there'll be quite good quality questions that we want to abstract out of the expertise and knowledge that these people on the stage have. So I'd just like to introduce Nicholas just to make a presentation, please.
Thank you. So I'm hoping that magically my slides appear, or perhaps I need to make them. There you are. This is the magic. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. So I have to get what I have to say to you said fairly quickly, because I want to play you a video at the end of what I say, and I have about 10 minutes. So hands up, who knows this person? Probably no one. Don't feel bad if you don't. His name is, no hands up. So his name is James Heckman, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he's an econometrician. But unlike lots of economists doing fancy mathematical tricks, he's done it in a way that has improved the world immensely. And his econometrics helped launch the craze for early childhood intervention. He looked at the studies of the Perry and Abecedarian preschool trials in the 1960s and showed that intensive intervention with very young children is a knockout of an investment in economic terms. And hence, because economics seems to be the uber discipline in our society, everybody thinks this is fantastic, which it is, and it became a world craze. Another thing that he pointed out from his research was that non-cognitive skills matter as much as cognitive skills. All those things that all the talking heads have got in mind when they say you've got to go to university and learn skills. The skills, at least half of the skills you need to learn to benefit you in life are not the sorts of skills that you learn that much about at university. They're skills typically taught in families and in communities, and they're non-cognitive skills. And so as a quick sort of shortcut to my theme, I want to ask you this question. Is there some analogue for organisations? And I think there is. I think organisations are full of cognitive skills and a little short on non-cognitive skills. The people in them have non-cognitive skills, of course, but organisations, I think, are often mesmerised by all the isms that they have in them, all the professions they have in them, all the people bossing everybody else about according to their vision of the world. So one possible way to think about unpicking that crazy mess is design. So what do you think this person is? And I'm afraid I've given you an awfully big clue. He's a designer. And what do you think he's doing? Any thoughts? He's a designer and he's looking at the design of hospitals. And look at what he's doing. He's placing himself in the position of a patient. And what do you think he found when he got to the office and looked at the video? What is on the video? Who knew? Doesn't everybody look down in hospitals? So this is actually a word-for-word just taken from the Deloitte website at the time that I did it, which is a couple of years ago. And I was a bit shocked at that word at the top, empathy. I thought, oh, you know, that's a bit sort of squishy, and the whole list is these are the values of design, if you like, what design is trying to do, and I realise the more I know about design, the more I see of what we're doing at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, the more I see empathy. And again, I actually don't mean it quite in the squishy way that we usually use it, that word, and sympathy. I see that as a kind of an engine. In economics, what fuels markets is the engine of self-interest. And people refer to self-interest in contemptuous tones, but there's nothing to be there's nothing contemptible about self-interest so long as it's balanced by other things. And there's this other engine. And that engine is empathy. But I think we kind of misunderstand quite how we might use that word. And I'm going to refer you to a famous thinker, a close personal friend of mine from the 18th century, Adam Smith. And he wrote two books, not one. One was on self-interest, and that was called The Wealth of Nations. And the other was on cultures and civilizations, if you like, and it was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and it is about what he called sympathy, and he didn't really mean gooey sympathy, he meant sympathy as a form of cognition. What the hell do I mean by that? Sympathy, he said, was this fact that trapped inside our own consciousness, there is only one way we can understand other people, and we need to understand other people, if only for our self-interest, but in fact it's a much broader thing than that. There is only one way we can understand other people, and that is to imagine ourselves in their position. And that's what he's talking about as sympathy, and he says that that's what sticks the social world together. Relationship by relationship, family by family, community by community, nation by nation. Of course, there are other things going on, but he thinks of that as an engine. And here's somebody who might get a few boos here, I don't know. His name's Friedrich Hayek. And the thing about Friedrich Hayek is, I don't know whether people can read that. Can people read that, what he said there, or do they want me to read it out to them? Read, okay. Today, it is almost heresy to suggest that scientific knowledge is not the sum of all knowledge, but there is a body of very important but unorganised knowledge, the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place. Practically every individual has some advantage over all others precisely because he possesses unique information of which beneficial use might be made, but of which use can be made only if the decisions depending on it are left to him or are made with his cooperation. Now, Hayek then took that idea, that was a general idea that he had in the 1920s and 30s, and the way in which he conceived his free market crusade. It's a critique of central planning, that sentence, but doesn't it mean so much more? And isn't there so much further that he could have taken that? And if he's a critic of central planning, then why didn't he say that a whole lot of central planning is absolutely inevitable in society? It's inevitable in governments, it's inevitable in organisations. So what are the tricks other than markets that might help alleviate that problem? And Hayek didn't really pursue that, but I think that's something really worth trying to think about. That's how Toyota made as much money as it has, how it became the most powerful, most richest car company in the world, by trying to figure out ways of ameliorating the pathologies of central planning. Did Hayek care? Sadly, no. But his writings from the 1920s and 30s might have suggested that he might have. So quickly then, here is the human side of those issues. This person is called Mystique. I used to call her by a phony made-up name to preserve her privacy. She didn't want her privacy preserved. She doesn't like being anonymous. And she was taken from her family within 2 or 3 years of being born. She was taken into care, and these are her words. At 18, people turned up and said, "Get out of here. You've had your 18 years. Here's a book. Here's $750. And by the way, don't try and make any contact with any of the people who you have come to know and love over the last 16 years, because you're now a risk on our books." These are people, this is a system full of people who decided to do social work and wanted to make the world a better place and want to help people. And somehow it got to this. This is sort of from a year or so ago in Australia. So it's a remarkable thing. I call it a tyranny. Of course, not all organisations are like this, but the sort of creeping, this capacity we have within systems to tyrannise. And so I want to tell you about a program, and I'm going to end with the video. The program some of you may know of is called Family by Family. It was built by trying to see, if I describe to you what we did, it just sounds like a bunch of cliches, you know, putting the client, putting the people at the centre of what we do. What does that mean? There are so many interpretations of that. Well, one of the things that it means is that this is the heart of the program. It's an empty bubble. We engage families, we ask families, we recruit them in shopping centres, we say to families who thinks they need some help and who would like to help families who think they need some help. The families who think they need some help write in that empty bubble what they would like to change, what they would like to fix. Sometimes they write things that sort of don't seem to us quite what they should be. Like they'd like to be more creative when their kids are kind of trying to kill each other. And through that process, it is a remarkably powerful process. Now, the other thing I want to say to you is that this doesn't partake of what I call the Rousseau fallacy. You may know of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He didn't use this expression, but he's sort of famous for the expression noble savage. This is the idea that civilization's all wrong. If only we could get back to nature, we're all really lovely people. I see this as sort of half of that answer, that we're kind of doing it wrong, but that it is a recrafting of the relationship between professional knowledge and what people do themselves. In other words, it isn't a bunch of professionals saying, we've got a degree, we learnt stuff at uni, your kids aren't going to school, what are we going to do to fix it? It is a process of mentoring where people work on things that they've chosen to work on, and professional knowledge appears as a midwife, not an obstetrician, if you like, which is to say that the families have coaches who coach them through this process. It isn't, so the whole role of professional knowledge is completely decentered and rearranged. I will now play you the video, and I think that's the most powerful thing that I could show you. I think it speaks for itself. Thank you. Supposed to start. Yes, it is starting.
Family by family is one of the most inspiring approaches to assisting very vulnerable families going through a tough time, that I've come across in 4 decades.
Family by Family is a network of families connecting with other families. One family have been through tough times and helping another family that are going through tough times.
They have different bubbles, which are what they want to change about their family, and they come together and experience different situations in which those bubbles can be achieved.
Lots of people are in that bit where they're trying to get through it and they can't get out the other side, so you can kind of go, you know what, I did this, I've been here, I've done that. I can actually get out. I can help you get out the other side. It can be done. It's not a completely hopeless situation. And I think that's mostly what sharing families have to offer, I think, is just themselves and their stories and their life.
Hi, I'm Linda.
Hi, I'm Brady.
I'm Adrian.
And this is Lucas with the youngest one, Talia, and we're seeking family from Playford.
When we met Linda and her family, they were going through a really hard time. They were at risk of having their family separated by having the children removed from the home.
27 notifications in the last 3 years before this year.
What we saw was a very sad, depressed family. There was a lot of confusion happening.
They wanted to take the kids till they were 18. I went through court for 3 months.
How can we help with this? Because we're just as dysfunctional as the next family. But then we realised that we'd actually learnt a lot of things that we could really help Linda with.
Rochelle and David have just coaxed me along and got me to come out my shell, I guess.
It's strange seeing your mum do these things that you've never thought she'd even try and
It's
do.
just been fantastic to go through court, having the support behind me and not losing my kids. I'm looking at a happier future with my kids. I feel really proud of myself now that my kids are happier. I'm a lot happier and able to do a lot more with them.
I'm Sue. I'm a seeking family. I'm a single parent with 4 children. My 9-year-old son has some special needs. He was too young for it to be labelled, so it got labelled as developmental delays, which is an umbrella thing. Yeah. Since then, I've been knocking on doors and you know, screaming and crying and whatever for help.
We have guest speakers giving us training, for example, from Autism SA. That was particularly significant with Sue because I was able to pass on that information.
Sorry, I'm getting sad because that's the kind of thing that family actually does, you know, when someone's sick or they're going to have an assessment for a disability. You know, the family ring up and see how the outcome is, or someone meets you there, and that's never happened. for myself and my children. Instead of me telling me, no, I'm useless, I'm this, that and the other, I've got someone saying, no, you are a good mum, you do a good job, you know. So it's just, yeah, that helps immensely.
Just seeing her come alive, the way that she holds herself compared to the way that she did when I first met her is just, yeah. She actually, you know, stands tall and smiles.
Now life is it's just going to get better. It's as good as it can get for me at the moment, I believe, you know.
My goals that we're working on at the moment are getting out more.
I'm getting to know her and not having her feel as though I'm a worker, I'm a friend, and I feel I am her friend now.
Jessie was afraid of leaving the house, afraid of connecting to other parents because she had a child in care, and she thought that people would judge her.
I think she helped me just by watching her. She's a good role model to be around, and that's just left tread marks on me.
She has just come so far in such a short amount of time, and her own reflection of what's happened for her and what's changed for her has been really inspiring.
I think it was mostly because of my self-confidence. I didn't have any. And I feel like when I'm out doing stuff by myself, sometimes I might feel alone. And like people are looking at me and thinking that I'm stupid, but I'm not. I'm just having fun with my son.
So why invest? Because you get value for money. The families are the change makers and the professionals are in the background, which basically means when you scale, it's cost effective.
You should invest in Family by Family because this program actually works.
It works.
It works. It works.
It works.
It clearly works.
It's giving us hope of a new way of reaching out to troubled families, drawing on the strengths that exist in other families.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholas Gruen. It must be remiss of me to, in the introduction, that he is a widely published policy economist, entrepreneur and commentator on our economy, the society and innovation, and being CEO of Lateral Economics and the chair of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. There's numerous other positions as well. So the expertise there is much appreciated. Thank you for that presentation. I now move on to Ms. Rebecca Scott. Rebecca is the co-founder and CEO of Street, which is a social enterprise that provides homeless and disadvantaged youth with a pathway from the street to long-term employment in the hospitality industry. So if I can just get Rebecca to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'm going to talk a lot less, I'm going to talk a lot more personally, I guess, about my own journey as a social entrepreneur and how I ended up where I am and some of the kind of harebrained things that keep me hopefully innovating. So just kind of some very personal stories of weird things I do in the middle of the night. I'm a plant biologist, and how did a plant biologist end up working in homelessness? And for me, it was a trip to Vietnam where I walked into a cafe called Koto. Some of you might know it in Hanoi. And I went in to go and have a meal. I didn't know about Koto at the time, but I was living in Hanoi just doing some volunteer work. And ordered the rice paper rolls with tamarind sauce, sat down to have my meal, and on the table was a little postcard, and that postcard told me that it was a social enterprise that was helping young people come off the streets of Hanoi. I'd never heard of social enterprise. I didn't know that there was such a thing as social enterprise. And that moment of realising that you can solve tricky problems using the marketplace was just, it was epiphany. It opened up my whole world so much from that kind of moment. I'd always done lots and lots of volunteer stuff. I'd always worked in kind of doing community projects on the side of my science job at CSIRO. But that idea that the marketplace could be where you could solve some problems rather than how I'd traditionally seen either non-profits or governments try and solve problems, to me was just extraordinary. And I feel like homelessness became my equivalent of a stone in my shoe. I saw something, all of a sudden I realised kind of the extent of the issue. And you know, if you've got a stone in your shoe, you're walking along and you're trying to work out, well, how far have I got to go? You know, is it worth stopping, taking off my shoe, you know, getting the stone out? And it probably depends on how big the stone is. So if it's a tiny little stone and you're not going far, you can just kind of get over it and figure that you're going to be home soon. But homelessness for me felt like the stone in my shoe that just actually kept on getting bigger. The further that I walked, the bigger that the stone got, the more I felt it rubbing, and in the end I just couldn't walk away. And I got to a point of just saying, well, whose problem is it to fix up stuff that's broken in the community? Whose problem is it to fix really big broken things that we've been trying to fix for a really long time but clearly haven't been winning the battle on? For me, homelessness was like that. Every single census, the numbers were going up and up and up. So it wasn't that we weren't putting resources into it. We clearly have been putting resources into trying to fix homelessness for a very, very long time. But how come we're not actually solving the problem? And for me, that just seemed extraordinary that in a country like Australia, with the amount of wealth that we have, that we haven't solved a problem like that, such a fundamental human right to have a house. And so for me, I rang my partner, Kate, when I was at Koto. That night I rang and said, I've just worked out what I want to do for the rest of my life. Can we move to Vietnam? She was sitting in Canberra and said, I'm coming to stay with you, or coming to visit you in a month's time in Vietnam. Please don't make any rash decisions. We'll talk about when I get there. By the time she got there, I'd had another month of scheming, and I quit my job at the CSIRO, took my long service leave on the day that it was due at CSIRO, and that's a decade actually this coming month, and jumped into the world of social enterprise. For me, what it offered was the world just got so much bigger all of a sudden that the canvas that I could start to play on just expanded. And the things that troubled me so much about the way that we're trying to solve homelessness is that we've traditionally thought of homelessness as a housing issue, and it just isn't a housing issue. It is absolutely, that's part of the problem, but there are so many other parts of the system or the issue that we needed to look at. So one of the reasons we decided to build a social enterprise in the first place was to give us financial sustainability long term. We wanted to be able to think about the issue in a way that just wasn't traditionally thought of, but we wanted to be able to have some independence and have our own revenue stream that allowed us to do things a bit differently. So in our case, it was a case of try and build a model that longer term we could be financially self-sufficient. And where we're at right now as an organisation is still quite early in our development. So we're 5 years old, but we now run 7 businesses here in Melbourne, 7 hospitality businesses, 5 cafes. So of those 7, 5 are cafes, 1's a catering company and 1's a roasting company. And we're up to 70% self-sufficient so far. Now, we've still got a long, long, long way to go, so we're tiny. I come into something like this with the Red Cross and just see the scale of it, but knowing that our decision was to try and build a business model that would address homelessness. So we're 70% of the way here in Melbourne, from kind of where we set out to be originally. There's just so much that's possible. And I look around and start to see the marketplace and the possibilities in the marketplace. But the thing I think we're often incredibly constrained in our thinking about, we're often thinking about, well, we just don't have enough money. And money actually isn't the problem most of the time. I think a lack of creativity is the problem. Money's important. Of course it's important. But anything that I've ever been able to grow has never ever started with money. And the thing that I love about thinking about how we solve problems is we can start to think about value in the system. And value in the system is not just about financial value. We often think kind of about capital and just going, we need dollars, we can't start stuff until we've got cash. But it's just not the case. I'm going to give you a really absurd example. I'm running a little experiment at the moment for myself. When I'm trying to solve a problem or trying to think creatively, there's 2 questions I always ask myself. How much goodness can I squeeze into the thing, the product or service that I've got. So how much good? So I run that test for myself all the time at Street. If I walk into a cafe and I say, how much goodness can I squeeze into one cup of coffee? So we're in the business of serving people. We're about to, in March, have served 1 million customers. But how do I know that I've squeezed the absolute most goodness into that product that I can? So what would one mouthful of goodness look like? If I start to think about how much goodness you can squeeze into the 3,000 drops that are in a cup of coffee, I can start to go in any direction. I can start to look along our supply chain and think about all the places that we got our coffee and our cups and our packaging and all of those things. But I can start to go in any direction with that product and start to think about what does goodness look like, where does it come from, where's it going, who are the people involved in that whole process of making that cup of coffee, who are my customers, how can we add value to them, what do they think is value? That's one question. That's one of the first questions I ask myself the whole time. But the other question I always ask myself is, how much homelessness can I stop with X? X being whatever I want to make X. I'm going to give you an absurd example. How much homelessness can I stop with a broken Rubik's Cube? It sounds ridiculous, I know, but it's an experiment that I've been running for the last couple of months. I'm a terrible hoarder, and I really like to find weird shit on the streets. I'm always collecting weird stuff that I find. Most of the time it's stuff that's thrown out. So I did a little experiment with myself recently and said, I wonder how much homelessness I could stop with a broken Rubik's Cube. I was walking down the street and it was hard rubbish time in Flemington, and there was a completely smashed Rubik's Cube on the street. And so I got a plastic bag and got all the bits of the Rubik's Cube together, put it in a little bag and took it home. And I've been looking at that Rubik's Cube for quite a while, trying to work out how I would stop homelessness with that broken Rubik's Cube in lots and lots of pieces. So I made the Rubik's Cube into an artwork, and that Rubik's Cube is on one of the cafe walls in our Flemington cafe. And 5 customers have now asked if they could buy that broken Rubik's Cube. They're prepared to pay $200 for the broken Rubik's Cube. Now that seems absurd. Now I have done quite a nice job of creating an artwork out of it. So there's a little bit of talent that's in there, but it is nothing more than a Rubik's Cube, a pencil that I've done some stuff around the broken Rubik's Cube. So I've stuck the Rubik's Cube to a bit of paper and then put a frame around it. I went to IKEA and got a really cheap frame. Someone's prepared to pay $200 for that broken Rubik's Cube. I know for a young person coming through the street program, for that young person, I can 0.5% of my budget for a young person coming through the street program, I can use from that broken Rubik's Cube. Now, it's a really ridiculous example, I know, but I run that example all the time and examples like that through my mind. If I start to think about how much homelessness could I stop from a computer, how much homelessness could I stop from a light bulb, how much homelessness could I stop from 40 tonnes of sultanas, for example. A couple of months ago, someone said to me, I've got 40 tonnes of sultanas sitting in a warehouse. Could you do anything with them? I said, I know I will be able to. Just give me at least a day to think about it, but I'd love you 40 tonnes of sultanas. Turns out that 40 tonnes of sultanas with 40 tonnes of flour with 4 tonnes of sugar can make 500,000 Christmas puddings and could generate an enormous amount of money with 500,000 Christmas puddings. So I've talked to a bakery here in Melbourne that creates very, very, very large scale amounts of could create a very large number of Christmas puddings, but you could stop a lot of homelessness with 40 tonnes of sultanas. So I guess what I'm trying to do the whole time is just think of the most unlikely things that could connect, that they don't actually have to start with dollars, but they're just things that just putting weird stuff together and seeing how do those things potentially connect. My creative process often starts by getting really, really unusual groups of people together. if I had to think about kind of who was my tribe of people, I would draw 4 big circles kind of in a Venn diagrams that intersected. They were people who dreamt really, really big and wanted to solve really big, intractable problems. The second circle would be people who were creative in thinking about resources and how resources can go together. The third big circle that intersects is people who just get shit done. We can talk all day, but at the end of the day, we've got to start trying some stuff and taking some risks. So people who execute. And the fourth one for me is people who have fun along the way. So we just want to have fun when we're trying this stuff. So for me, where those 4 things intersect always feels like a little sweet spot of innovation. I've got a bunch of people that I call sidekicks, and we get together and just think of weird things together. How might that connect with that? Or how might that connect with that? It doesn't matter what industry you come from, I'm interested in having the conversation. To give you a sense of how you can scale up those conversations, on Monday I got together with very, very senior executives with NAB Bank. We're about to do a really big impact investment deal with NAB that'll be announced in about a month and a half. We're about to build a really large production facility and training academy for homeless young people here in Melbourne that allows us to put through 250 young people each year in training. And that facility, we needed a whole bunch of people to come on board with, and NAB are one of our big impact investors in that. But I spoke to them a couple of weeks ago and said, I don't want to think about this as a debt deal. If we just think about this as transacting, it'll just be like any other boring deal. You'll hand over money and we'll use that money to go and get a building made, but there's so much more value that we can create from this transaction. So let's sit down together and park the money to one side and sit down and say, how can we create value together? And let's put any crazy idea on the table, and we have 1 hour and our time starts now. On Monday, in 1 hour, we came up with 87 other ways that NAB and Street could work together. 87 ideas in 1 hour. And then in half an hour, we whittled those down. I said, tell me which of these things you do not have authority to do. Tell me which, so what things in here could I, as the CEO of Street, know that I could action, and between you as senior executives, you have the authority to say, yes, we can do that. There were only 4 of those 87 ideas that we said weren't viable right now. Some of them we think might be longer term, so we're going to go and find out where else in the bank we need to talk to. But we had more than 80 ideas straight away that we thought that we could start to action. Now, some of them are probably small impact, but some of them I think could be extraordinary. It would be really easy for us at Street to say we can't have impact because we're a 40-person organisation. And for every one of our staff members, they have 10,000 staff members. But that's the exciting bit, that we get to sit down and say, we want to operate a different way in the marketplace, and we really want partners who have got scale who can start to do that with us. And they're as excited as we are about that, because even if we did 5 of those 80 ideas, we would start to be getting some scale and doing some exciting stuff. So for me, there's a bunch of principles. Dream really, really big. Keep scanning really, really high. Bring the most unlikely people that you can ever think of together to do that dreaming. What Nick said before, I couldn't agree with more around that kind of human-centred design, it's co-created design that you're doing, and empathy is absolutely critical to it. Give yourself the challenge of trying to work out, how would I solve this problem without dollars? So keep on cutting off options when you're thinking creatively. How would I solve this problem if I had no money? How would I solve this problem if I had and just keep chopping off resources. I always find the most creativity comes from thinking when I've got the most scarcity of resources. But then go the opposite way. Well then what are all the resources at my fingertips, and how would I start to harness all of those? Because if you think about building stuff when you've got nothing and then go back out, you can start to think of some amazing things. Look where you least expect it. It may not be a broken Rubik's Cube, but places that you don't ever expect value to be. And execution, at the end of the day, you've got to actually start doing some things. So for me, it's about trying to make sure that it doesn't just stay in the creative mind space, but we start trying some stuff that seems a bit crazy. Just to give you a sense of, at the moment, I'm frustrated with how much stuff that we throw out at street, that just what our waste stream is. Our waste stream is so gigantic, and as we grow and grow and grow, more and more gets added to that waste stream. So I'm just going to give you a little example. Nick, can I grab you for a second? I have, you go that direction, and I go this direction. Actually, maybe come back this way a little bit, from to where you get to. I find it really, really hard to work in normal books. So I have dozens and dozens of these books. And what this one is the first mapping of our waste stream and where that waste stream, what kind of components of our waste stream are there, and just crazy ideas of how that waste stream might be able to turn into stuff. There's hundreds and hundreds of ideas there, but for me it's about being able to connect this little bit to maybe that little bit down there, and I don't know which of any of these ideas will work. Maybe none of them will. But starting to connect them in really unusual ways and saying, well, imagine if we could say, we want to give ourselves a goal of saying, by X date, we don't want anything in our waste stream not getting the maximum amount. We don't want to lose any of the value in our waste stream, and what might that look like? So what are the things that we could start to create and add more value to stuff that we're currently throwing out? It's just one little idea of stuff, but if we do that in every part of our organisation and start to say, well, this is just the stuff that we're throwing out, I think we've got a huge amount of value that we can keep creating from that. But every part of our organisation, how could that part of our organisation start to maximise value? So for me, it's always about asking the question, how can we create the most value in every single thing that we do? And that you can think about that forever, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. The logic and the simplicity of that is just extraordinary, and it was a good presentation. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Peter Walton. For some, probably doesn't need any introduction, but he's the head of international program at Australian Red Cross, joining in October 2013. He has over 20 years international experience working in multi-sector international development in both the not-for-profit organisations and also the private sector. Peter.
There we go. I think people often think of innovation and as being synonymous with technology, so I was a little bit frightened that if the technology was going to fail, it was probably going to be in an innovation session. I'm going to try to talk about innovation specifically within humanitarian action. Being the head of the international program with Red Cross, a lot of what we do is respond to humanitarian emergencies around the world. And the title of the session here today was around innovation, fact or fiction in a competitive environment. And I guess what I really want to talk about is we've got a long-standing history within the sector of innovation. I think it's clearly a fact, but it's also something that has to be absolutely part of our DNA. It has to be something that is absolutely embedded in the way that we work, because we operate in very changing times. So I'm going to talk about that as a necessity, and I'm also going to talk about different types of innovation. Despite the comment that I just made, I think it is really clear that there are so many different forms of innovation. But I think, we've been talking about innovation quite a lot during this summit, and I keep hearing things like innovation around how we engage with social media, how we engage with technology, how mobile phones are absolutely making a difference. This is, of course, is all true. But innovation isn't always about that. Innovation is also about many other aspects, and I'll talk a little bit about that, argue why I think there is a compelling case to make sure that innovation is a fundamental part of what Red Cross does on an ongoing basis, and a few things which perhaps need to change. So let's start with, I guess, some of the academics. Many of you that have looked into innovation will probably be familiar with this model, the 4 Ps model. I'd suggest there's 5 Ps, and I'll come to that in a moment. But there are innovations around product. There are innovations around processes. There are innovations around how the position of an organisation. And then there are innovations which are much more the game changers, the innovations which really just transform the way that a particular job is done. And within the humanitarian sector, there are some fine examples, mainly in the first two, the product and process innovation areas, but also there have been some paradigm shifts, and keen to share some of those with you. If we think about products, the international system is built on the idea of delivering goods and services to communities affected by disasters and conflicts. And there has been a long-standing practice of introducing new products to disaster-affected people. And I know there's a couple of people that have had experience with Oxfam here. I can see David as one. Oxfam in the 80s introduced a new product for famine relief, the famine biscuit. Many of you may remember that. Something which was designed to be easily transportable, highly nutritious, something that was easy to store. That's an example of a product innovation that really made a difference in terms of a lot of famine relief in the 1980s especially. There's been a lot of duds. Innovation, I think as both the earlier presenters said, it isn't always about success. It's about failure. It's about trying and failing but learning. And there's been no shortage of examples within the humanitarian sector, as in any sector. More recently, in terms of product innovation, there's been something that's been presented as the humanitarian drinking straw. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah, a few people. This is a straw that uses filtration technology so that it will basically enable any water to be safely consumed, regardless of source. Basically a filtration device. If you just think about that, something like that, if it genuinely works in the way that we think, could really transform the nature of emergencies and the nature of response. In terms of process innovation, there's no shortage of changes that have taken place, and process innovations aren't always huge, but sometimes have a huge difference, make a huge difference. Sometimes they're the incremental changes that we've seen. It was only probably 20 to 30 years ago, stockpiling essential goods for an emergency wasn't something that was routinely done. If there was an emergency in a far-flung part of the world, we'll be thinking about, okay, where are we going to get the essential equipment from? We don't do that now. There's stockpiles in this critical locations so that we can speed up the response. That was a significant process innovation. Seems obvious, but something that wasn't always done. In terms of the way that international organizations in the humanitarian space coordinate their work, there's been significant innovations, process innovations there too. The cluster system, where one organization will take the lead on a particular area like shelter or education, was a development. We have seen innovations around standards. There's the Sphere Code, there's the People in Aid Code, which tries to document what is better practice in terms of humanitarian response. And we have seen the introduction of how technology can really make a difference. Mobile phone technology and SMS technology has been used to track in real time violence after elections or things like that, tracking the epidemiological spread of diseases in real time through the use of technology. All of these are significant improvements to our process. And then, of course, there's position. Not so much position innovations within the humanitarian sector, which are really trying to reframe the nature of the work in terms of how it's presented, how it's marketed. But I was in the non-communicable diseases workshop yesterday, and someone made the example that Coca-Cola is trying to innovate in terms of its positioning. And I kid you not, in 15 years, they want to be regarded as the world's biggest wellness company. The non-communicable diseases workshop has a few other things to think about that. I'll come on to the paradigm innovation in a second, of which there's been some, but the fifth P that I think we need to integrate in this is people, and the two earlier presenters both touched on this. Innovation isn't something that just happens. Innovation is something that is created through thinking time, through being able to be creative, being able to take risk. And I think it's very easy to look at what is more the academic situation, but really innovation is all about people. So we have seen loads of different changes within the humanitarian space over the last 10 to 20 years. And I touched on some of these earlier. There's a whole raft of them. But what I would say is that they've focused on performance and results, and they've focused on developing codes and standards, but they've basically been within existing mental models. They've been predominantly around product, predominantly around process, and predominantly incremental. But if we think back to the Model T car, Henry Ford, before he created the Model T motor vehicle, this is what he said. He said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So there are game changers, there are things that can make a big difference. And I was thinking about, well, what are some of the game changers that have occurred in the international development and humanitarian space? And there have been some. One is around the shift towards disaster prevention, disaster risk reduction, and now much more around community resilience, so that we put more emphasis on the prevention, the reducing or mitigating the impact of disasters. The Red Cross released its World Disasters Report this year, as we do every year, and one of the things that we've been able to try to quantify is that for every $10 spent in the humanitarian space, only $1 is actually spent on reducing the risk of disasters. Yet, at the same time, we know that for every dollar that we spend, if a disaster does hit that particular area, we save $18. It's a significant difference that puts the emphasis on how do we prevent the impact, the shock of disaster, how we put emphasis on how do we manage the stresses. And you know, I think in some respects, the sort of the relief and welfare mentality that has existed sometimes seems quite archaic now. It seems almost indefensible and illogical that we aren't putting more emphasis on helping communities prepare so that we can save thousands of lives and we can do it more cost effectively. You know, that sort of shift away from pure relief, which some would argue is sort of slightly colonial anyway, has been a massive game changer and a big shift. As has been, and I think this touches on a point that Nicholas made earlier, the importance of local ownership, local partners, the genuine localization of humanitarian response. And this was something that was a really strong message that came after the Asian tsunami. There was a real feeling that there needed to be a reorientation of the international humanitarian system around how local capacities are really built up, how local, in our case, Red Cross's case, local national societies genuinely have the capability to be able to respond and provide humanitarian assistance. It's work in progress, I have to say. I think there hasn't been as much movement as we would like to see. But I think it is part of the process of, as Nicholas says, recognizing what, no one knows their local community better than people that live there. But we have been in a mindset which still thinks of them, or can think of them as, not as active participants, but as passive recipients or even victims. And, we need to change that mentality. Because if I was to quote Henry Ford again, he also said back at the time of the Model T that they can have any colour they want as long as it's black. I mean, it's such a famous quote, I'm sure everybody's heard of it. In humanitarian organisations, is there not a risk that they can have any aid they want as long as it's the type of aid that we want to give them and donors are willing to fund? When do we start challenging that if we're thinking about a paradigm shift? So we can't solve the problems of today by using the same thinking that was used when we created them. The world is changing at such a rapid pace, and our new Secretary General, as C, really spoke about that it is changing at a rapid pace, but how are traditional models, how are they equipped to actually adequately respond? And I think we really do need to change, and hence why I would argue it's a compelling case for continuous innovation. We need to adjust more to more urban programming, and look at how we actually are best equipped to be able to do that. We need to look at how we move towards responding to engaging with endemic violence more than war. There are so many different situations which aren't war-related, but where endemic, long-term chronic violence is a significant issue. We need to genuinely overcome this concept of feast or famine. If you think about the emergency that took place in Haiti a few years ago, there were 3,000 organizations involved in that response. 3,000, and we know that the risks of overcrowding and also the risks of messy coordination. Yes, and efforts are there to improve that, but so much more needs to be done. But in stark contrast to that, you take a complex emergency, a high-risk environment, Central African Republic or even Syria. Organisations like the International Committee of the Red Cross or even MSF are saying, you know, where the hell is everyone? We're the only ones here. So how do we manage the peaks and troughs so that we're able to respond to the world's humanitarian crisis in a much more even and consistent way? And you know, this is why I think there is such a compelling case for making continuous innovation just part of our DNA. Now, I've put appropriate technology up there also because I do like technology. We have to have one eye on technology as being a potentially disruptive game changer, which could be good and hopefully will be good. But I think we also need to make innovation part of our DNA because we've got to beware of silver bullets as well, that there often isn't that quick fix that some people would like. So I've been given a heads up to conclude. So let me conclude by just a few implications for Australian Red Cross. Innovation needs to be part of what we do, not added on. It can't be something that we think we're going to do and we're going to get some young people involved to do it, we're going to get some technology in and we're going to solve some problems. It's got to be part of what we do all the time. And this means challenging our culture. It means making sure that we have an appetite to manage both risk and to manage failure, as well as hopefully transformation and success and better humanitarian response. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Just so people are aware, we are actually got another 10 minutes up our sleeve beyond the time advertised in the program. Just introducing Dr. Andrew Young. Andrew's been the Chief Executive Officer of the Centre for Social Impact since early 2012, and he's dedicated to improving the effectiveness of social impact across the social purpose, government and corporate sectors in Australia. Bringing systems approach and believes that the keys to improving social impact include an outcome focus, evidence and measurement, collaboration and leadership development. Dr. Andrew Young.
Hello, is this on? I think better want to walk around a bit. I hope that's okay, not too distracting. How many of you volunteer or work for the Red Cross? Happy birthday. Most of you are looking pretty good for your age. Yeah, well done. Anybody want to have a guess about what's common to the images on this page? Australian innovations, all of them, including the fridge, which I didn't know, and the tank, according to one guy. Wi-Fi, the bionic ear, a lot of people would know, cervical cancer vaccine. The cask for wine. The Black Box flight recorder. I'm a bit disappointed with that one, mostly that it's been orange forever. The electric drill. Anyway, I want to say I don't know that we have a problem with innovation, and Australia has a reputation actually for being really good innovators. I don't know that that necessarily translates always to the social space, but I think there are plenty of cases when it does, including 2 or 3 of those. If we include health as part of that thinking, the ultrasound is another fabulous invention with huge impact. I do want to talk about this concept, and what I'm going to try and do over the next 10 slides or so is talk about a view of some of the bigger picture of innovation and the problems that I think that we have as a country, our systems and the barriers to effective innovation. A lot of those lessons, I would argue, can be applied within organisations too. So if your thinking is internal to Red Cross, I think that's fine. This quote, which has been attributed to a lot of different people, it has some older origins, but necessity is the mother of invention. I remember only a year or so ago having a guy called Charlie Leadbeater out in the country. Has anybody ever heard Charlie talk about innovation? He's a Brit. He's got not that there's anything wrong with Brits. He's got fantastic stories and examples about innovation, and he was talking to a group of CSI students and alumni about this. And at the end of the presentation, I said, you know, they're inspiring stories. They all come from India, Brazil, and a couple of other countries. I said none of them come from a developed context. why is that? And do you think that we have much hope of ever being innovative here? And his answer, in short, was no. We don't have much hope. And it's based on this premise that where needs are more acute, we tend to see more change, more innovation, more ideas. And that is a big problem for us. We have been way too comfortable for way too long. But there is hope. And the hope is we've run out of money. And one of my messages is that things are going to change in this country. I'll talk about that for the next 2 or 3 slides and come back to some bigger pictures. Just before I go on, another thing I wanted to say by way of intro is what I'm trying to talk about today. Rebecca's story about the stone in the shoe really struck a chord with me. For my sins, I've been an owner-builder at a home reno for the last 6 months or so. We moved back in with a mud pit for a backyard. Over the last 6 weeks, I've personally moved 38 tonnes of stuff from the top of our driveway down to the back to build retaining walls, soil and lawn and stuff like that. Anyway, I have had a stone in my shoe for each and every of the last 6 weekends. And I made that decision very early on. I would take the shoe off and get the stone out. But when you're moving that much gravel, as soon as you do that, another one replaces it. And that's kind of the context for what I'm trying to talk about here. I think we do have lots of small innovations, not that all of those are small. What we need to think hard about is how to make them much more common and much more impactful, and that's really what I want to talk about. Let's have a quick chat about our system effectiveness. I'll give you an impossible question. Mind you, I've asked this question of about 3,000 people in the last 18 months. If I gave you those 4 choices for our system performance in improving social outcomes for every dollar that we spend on it over the last 30 years or so, which one would you pick? And I'm talking about Australia here and health, welfare, education, Indigenous, juvenile justice, homelessness, you name it. So that's why it's an impossible question. I won't spend long on this because we are running out of time, but anybody for exponential growth and improvement in outcomes for every dollar we spend in the last 30 years? We've got one taker. That's my third one in 3,000. Without trying to be disparaging, maybe I'll have a chat to you on the break and find out what you're thinking about. Who would say slow and steady? Maybe 0.5%, 1% per annum over that time. We've got 6 or 7 hands. Flatline, status quo. A few more hands. Does that mean the rest of you are negative or agnostic? Who's on the negative line? Right. Okay, that was a slightly more pessimistic view than my average, which looks a bit like this. Most people genuinely don't think we have made much progress, if any, in improving our performance and delivering outcomes. And I want to argue that's in part to a lack of innovation, but more to some other things. The Australian social impact system, won't dwell on this, it's very big. We spend over $300 billion a year on social purpose across health, welfare, education, and a bunch of other areas. And it's growing quickly. The not-for-profit sector grew at over 6% per annum in the last 6 years, compounding. It makes it our fastest growing industry, even faster than mining, over that period of time. Government funding to the not-for-profit sector grew by 60.5% in a 6-year period to 2012-13. It's growing. Hasn't performed very well over 30 years or more. We can dissect that one in a lot more detail, but another day. We just had a look at that. And faces massive challenge over the next 30 years. I was born in 1970. That's a fact I'm getting less and less willing to admit to. I'll stop using it soon. But in 1970, we had about 7.5 working age Australians for every older Australian in the country. This has been much talked about of late. By 2010, that was down to about 5. And by 2050, it'll be about 2.5. So that is a seismic shift, 2.6, 2.7, depending on your projections. Seismic shift in the proportions of Australians who are of working age. It'll be offset because some people work longer and things like that. But it's going to have an enormous impact. Treasury's estimates are that in 2010 we spent a quarter of our tax dollar on services for the aged across healthcare services, aged care services and pensions. By 2050 they're saying 50%. Productivity Commission late last year published a report that said it might be worse. We have to face facts. We ran out of money sometime last year or so across state and federal governments. Everybody started to take notice. Actually, we've seen this coming for a long time. We haven't really put a lot away in the silos for the next 7 or 30 years, as the case may be. We haven't changed enough yet. We've got a lot of work to do. That's my message about change is coming. I don't want to harp on that. I want to get back to the point. This is a video to watch later. I don't think we'll have time today. If anybody's seen the newsroom, I think this is from the first episode, a couple of people nodding. Jeff Daniels is asked a question in a college auditorium, and the question is, why do you think America is the greatest country on earth? And he kind of dodges the question, and the facilitator prompts him to say, no, we want something on this, answer the question. And so he spends the next 3.5 minutes ridiculing America. And if there are any Americans in the room, I apologise. I do have a point that's about Australia here. But he says, America leads the world in only 3 categories: number of adults who believe in angels, number of incarcerated citizens, and the amount they spend on defence, which is more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are America's allies. And he gives a whole bunch of statistics about areas in which they are a long way from the greatest country on earth, and he laments days gone by. But he gets to the end of the video and he makes his point. The first step in addressing a problem is acknowledging that you have one. And that's really the point I want to make. Australia hasn't claimed to be the greatest country on earth, or maybe we do, I don't know. But we have had this tagline attached to us for a long time now, the lucky country. And for 16, 18% of our population, it is just demonstrably not true. And collectively, I think we have our heads stuck in the sand about that. We have not addressed those issues at all effectively in 30, 40 years of increasing spending and spending and spending and spending. And it's time to wake up to that and understand how we're going to fix those issues in the next 30 years with less money. So that is my organisation's question. What are the keys to improving social impact? This quote, we've learned to create the small exceptions that can change the lives of hundreds. We've not learned how to make the exceptions the rule to change the lives of millions. Now, I won't harp on this slide. We've had different people talking about some of the tips to innovation, and you can find almost all of Rebecca's personal stories about how she's triggered innovation in literature about innovation. You can also look at studies on organisations that are more innovative, and people will write everything from innovation in organisations is all about creating a skunk works and protecting it so that it can innovate and black out the windows and don't let anybody talk to them. And then you'll find another one who will say, actually, no, innovation is all about creating systems and cultures that foster innovation. You don't want to make it isolated, you want to make it endemic. And you find another one that says, actually, there's 12 different keys to innovation, and you've got to do all of them. And those 3 quotes come from the same article. But it's a good illustration of what you can find in the literature. Innovation is a massively overused word. It means so many different things. Peter talked about process and product and so on. Innovation is all of those things. Actually, there's all sorts of keys to innovation, all kinds of people who can be innovative. The only, just before I go to that, the only thing that is common to most innovations, according to one study, is the presence of running water. They interviewed a whole bunch of people who were known to be innovative, and every one of their stories, bar a couple, there was water in it. There's one guy actually puts on a scuba tank and sits at the bottom of his pool with a special pen and a piece of plastic and writes out his ideas. There's another guy who sits by a stream or in the shower, flushing toilet. You get the idea. But that was the only common factor they found. My point is, it's diverse. Innovation can happen anywhere, in any sector, at any time. Now, I am seeing, as part of a centre that teaches a lot of university students, this passion for social enterprise. And I don't want to denigrate it. I think that it has a massively important role to play. However, we also need, arguably even more greatly need, innovation in our large organisations and our bureaucracies. And one of my fears is a lot of our talent is not going to go there, because these are places that have built systems and structures that deaden innovation. I think we are much better at killing it than fostering it, and we need to change that. Okay, this is CSI's framework for improving social impact. There are 6 keys to social impact in the future. It's really quite simple. I'm not going to talk about that. One of them is fostering and scaling social innovation. I want to make 2 points about this slide. One, it's at the top right. There is no inherent value in you. Innovation has to lead us somewhere. Not necessarily on its first day, that'll kill it. But we also have to be thinking about where is the impact in this innovation in time, and thinking about how that is going to come about. Usually that means that some of us at least need to have a view of the system. In this case, this is a view of the social impact system. It may or may not be right. But one of the keys in complex systems theory is simply this: working on any one element in isolation will fail. And we've been proving this in communities across this country for 30 years now. We must take a more systemic view of how we're going to solve issues and how we're going to create an environment that breeds successful, impactful innovation. And it's not just by fostering innovation. As I've already said, as a country, we're not bad at that part. Where we are terrible is adoption and scale and changing what we do in the mainstream. And we have a track record of sending our innovators overseas in all sorts of sectors as a result of that. We need a VC model for innovation in this country, in government, in our large organisations, as well as a model that will fund and support and sustain our social enterprises. If you want to read more about innovation, check out Jeff Mulgan and just about anything he's written or presented. This is his model for the pipeline of innovation, same sort of stuff. But we don't have to just look overseas. There's 100 organisations in Australia doing a great job with innovation too. I put Red Cross on there because it's your birthday. I don't actually know. Some keys. Recognise that we are failing. Recognise where we are failing. Think about the barriers, let's remove them, and there's hundreds, especially in larger organisations and bureaucracies. On the flip side, create the right incentives. I won't go into any of this in detail, there isn't time. Understand and build some of the system pathways while you're doing the fostering and incubation. Work on both. The answer is never one or the other, it's always both, in my opinion. There is no innovation and creativity without failure, period. I just wanted to use that as it's been mentioned a couple of times already. How good is it to fail in government today? On anything. I mean, seriously, I would not want to be a bureaucrat. There are people who are far more frustrated working inside government than I am, and I am frustrated, you know, and they want to. But failure just isn't acceptable. We've got to change that. Okay, the bottom two. Create a venture capital pipeline. I've talked about that. I've talked about both of those. This is my summary. Change is coming, point one. It is coming. It's going to happen to us slower than it's happened in some other parts of the world, but pressure for change will gradually increase. There will be less money. There is no one secret to innovation. There's 100 secrets to innovation. All sorts of people can be innovators. Some are very good at it. Innovation is critical, but also try to understand the system context. If you want impact, and that's really my point. Some keys include recognise, remove barriers, create incentives, understand and build systemic pathways. Do you know what my favourite renewable fuel is? An ecosystem for innovation. I think that sums up what I'm trying to talk about. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I just want to have the panel come up and just we've got just under 15 minutes to ask some questions. I'm sure there's some people out there that would be very keen to do that. Have we got a roving microphone? Just while we're doing that, probably a question, and I know Andrew at the end covered a bit of it there, but one of the biggest things I was intrigued to find out about is innovation's only as good as implementing it in the organisation if there's no barriers. And probably bearing in mind with Rebecca being at CSIRO and then shifting into the street organisation, I'd just be intrigued to hear what she's got to say about that.
I feel really bad, but I didn't actually listen to the beginning of your question. I was talking to my neighbour. We were talking about Koto in Vietnam over here. I'm so sorry.
Out the corner of my eye, I saw you doing that. No. The question was about barriers of innovation in an organisation, and that can possibly be one of the biggest problems that it doesn't actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I was at CSIRO at a really interesting time. I was there for a decade and sat quite close to the top in the head office at CSIRO. And one of the challenges of a big organisation is the structure. The structures get in the way. You know, we had 22 research divisions, amazing powerhouse of science happening there, phenomenal amount of knowledge in the organisation, but it all stratified. So you had amazing people over there doing stuff that just didn't know about what was happening on the other side of the organisation. And I still remember being in the room of CSIRO with the top executive team on the day that we came up with the idea of what's called the flagships. And they are essentially massive multidisciplinary science projects trying to address some of humanity's largest issues, but trying to say, well, how would you solve this issue here and bring together a physicist on that side of the organisation with a molecular biologist on that side of the organisation. So the organisation was just drastically trying to bring together the full amount of its knowledge. And one of the things that we found internally was not only were the structures kind of getting in the way, but there was just no internal communication. So you just didn't know what was on that side of the organisation. So my first job was actually to start a new team, an internal communication team, and my job was just to try and map out everything that was happening and let everyone know where all the amazing stuff was happening. So I think structures in big organisations can be really challenging. And even though, you know, if you can harness all of that stuff, extraordinary stuff can be done, but often it takes quite a different look at it.
Yeah, just quickly, probably Andrew's covered it, but to give the opportunity to Nicholas as well, whether you want to make any comment in regards to that.
Well, I guess I'll hazard a comment. We sort of go round and round in circles here. I mean, I haven't been a fan of what I've seen of CSIRO's flagships, and I think that's the one I'm thinking of is digital, actually, and I think what we do is we notice a whole lot of things that are wrong, and we say, well, we better go and fix those things that are wrong. And, well, what could sound more reasonable? But to take an alternative, Google gives people 20% time. In other words, that is an acknowledgement by the company that it doesn't know what it's doing. Okay, that it actually wants to introduce some seeded chaos into the organisation and some subversion, if I might use a strong word. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO, now chairman of Google, has been known to refer to 20% time, and 20% time, for people who are not following me here, is that 20% of the time people in Google can work on their own projects that they identify. He refers to that as Google's anti-jerk policy. What if your boss is a jerk? And sees a lot of what they're trying to do as basically come to terms with the impossibility of engineering innovation from the top. Also something that I chaired, I think, called the Government 2.0 Task Force, and it's a government report. One of the things that I think I'm quite proud of is that it's written in English, but there's a subtext to it which I think largely, it's there if you go and read it, and it is that that the subtext is a subversive subtext. We were saying that, again, according to the public service guidelines, public servants should blog and tweet and stuff like that. Now, my main reason for thinking that they should be doing that is essentially, and this may surprise you, talent spotting. If people are out, there's nothing like blogging to find out who's got something to say and to find it out quickly and to have other people be able to see it and to home in on it and start saying, okay, let's do some work together, or what do you think about this? It creates very quickly a kind of an open meritocracy. And some of those things, I'm just suggesting a sort of looseness which organisations feel almost obliged to try and kill or control. And if they don't feel obliged to do it, they don't sometimes know they're doing it. They think they're just being nice and organised, but they manage to kill it. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Nicholas. Questions from the floor, just in front here.
Yeah, my name's Miranda. I work for Australian Red Cross. Very proud to. Great organisation, great brand. An unwieldy beast, big bureaucracy, obviously. I work in Tide fundraising, so I run trusts and foundations, workplace giving, private ancillary funds, trusts and foundations. I work with super smart people in Australian industry, and they want true innovation. They want to see skill volunteering, etc. So I'm just going to give you a tiny bit of background. I'll be really quick, but my question is, I know it's difficult, but how do we organisationally change the mindsets of the board, etc., as to really move forward? So Rebecca, loved what you were saying. Red Cross would have 15 committees looking at your ideas and probably not go anywhere. Nicholas, fantastic, but I think Red Cross would see it as risky. What if one of the parents said something or did something or smashed somebody over the head? So not sure that would pass. Peter, great partnerships. We've just been dumped by PwC because we can't show that we can do creating shared value and partnerships. Andrew, I forgive you for your anti-British and American comment, but also, you talk about innovation, etc. But one of the things I think you said was the very best thing was that necessity is the mother of invention. And I'm being asked daily by organizations to show innovation. PwC wanted to see creating shared value. I brought it back inside. Not one single person could articulate that to me. And I'm not blaming anyone in services or anyone in senior management. It's the fact that we have nobody that is their responsibility to see gaps. Capacity building. Zurich Insurance would like to help us with GPS to find...
Sorry, we just need to get some other questions.
So they're the sort of things that are going on. I can't answer any of those questions currently. I think we could be innovative. I think Australia is very innovative, but certainly Australian Red Cross isn't and doesn't have organisational capacity to be. How can we change that?
I think there's a fair bit of a statement in there opposed to a question, and it's probably more an internal aspect of things.
More
but
how
but
do you start small? How do you get
Does someone want to
buy-in?
quickly answer that on the panel? Yeah, Peter? If you just be very brief, please.
I'll make the answer a little shorter than the question. Thanks, Miranda. But I think it's a really important question insofar as, look, we have got pockets of innovation within Red Cross, so thanks for putting the logo up, Andrew. Clearly, I think we have got that. I think what we don't have is a natural culture of innovation. And I think when we start thinking of how we remove barriers, I think we look at removing the symptoms. We don't actually look at the root cause issues. And I think as an organisation, innovation has got to be part of the culture. It's got to be part of something that is valued. And I think that starts with dialogue with our national leadership team and our board. And we get some practical examples going to try to nurture that culture.
Thanks, Peter. It's a fair response too. Just one down here.
That's a great good comment, Peter. But the thing is there's so much talk in Red Cross. There's just too much talk. And, I understand you saying creating a dialogue and stuff, but I feel like we've done that for too long now. It's getting to the point where enough talking, let's make some action. Because there are a wealth of ideas throughout the organisation. We we are innovative. I think a lot, just by the Innovation Fund, I've seen so many projects that are they're amazing. But all we do is we go, oh, here's some money, and go off and do your project, and you have to do it within 3 months, and that's all the time you have. But the thing is why aren't we giving people that opportunity to make it part of their daily lives and make it something that can, foster, improve the organisation and things? I really feel like there's too many barriers and there's just too much talk going on. How do we move from that?
I think, sorry, just time permitting, I do want to get some other questions. I don't want to shut that down because I think that's the whole idea of this summit. Beyond what Peter just said in regards to culture, was there any other view that you wanted to mention on regard or additional to that?
Well, just very quickly, I think most staff at Red Cross would share that, and I think I would actually say that most people crave an innovative culture. I think we have to address the barriers. That's why I think I concluded my presentation with we've got to make space for it. Genuine space to actually translate it into meaningful innovation, and that means taking risks. And we are risk averse, but we've got to have some appetite and some space to take risks and have some appetite to manage failure. And we haven't nailed that, so I appreciate the question, Shakira, but absolutely we need to be able to challenge that.
Nicholas, just briefly.
One thing I'd say is that never underestimate the ability of anyone to set goals. There's nothing that should stop. If there's lots of people who are frustrated in Red Cross, of all the things that you've just given voice to, get together and even without, you can choose to identify yourself or not, just put out some targets. Just say, we'd really like it if the board would commit to these things. And they wouldn't be, and I think they shouldn't be revolutionary, they just should be concrete, measurable achievements where you would say, I'd be really happy if they could do that. It's not all up to them. In other words, we have this instinct to look upwards, but if you just say this is what we want, you might get it, you might not. What have you got to lose?
Yep. Andrew, did you want to quickly say something on that?
Quick comment, or maybe two. We talked in that conversation a little bit about removing some of the barriers. I will say, I walked into this conference this morning, I've already heard two very different perspectives about some of the innovation discussion that happened yesterday. So it's clear from an outsider walking in that this is a very live debate here. So I think the organisation needs to figure out whether it wants to make innovation a theme of the next couple of years or so. If so, we've talked about removing barriers. I think it's important, but I think it's just as important to find ways to reward innovation. I think that with one side without the other in the risk-reward equation usually fails. And the other thing I would say is if it's a genuine priority, another thing that could be done is to implement some kind of a survey feedback mechanism to take the organisation's temperature and find out how they feel about not just the term innovation in the place, but a whole bunch of the critical factors that go into that and whether it's happening now. Now, there's lots that can be done. There's all sorts of culture change, org design change, things that can be done in the space of innovation. But I think the first thing that's got to happen is this a priority for us?
Thanks, Andrew. I really want to get 2 or 3 more questions. It's interesting, I'm only just a new board member too in the last month, so it's interesting to hear this feedback.
Thanks very much for your contributions. Obviously, there are a lot of people that are very creative inside any organisation, and Red Cross isn't an exception to that. I guess I'm particularly interested in the role of the board in shaping culture and in shaping an appetite for innovation. I'm just wondering, from your experience in other organisations, in your own organisations, how you see the role of the board and how boards can be the driver of this kind of innovation.
Did you want to direct that to someone? I prefer to stick with the external experts here today.
Yes, Andrew, particularly.
I think that the board has a number of roles, and two or three of them are particularly relevant. I'll say 3. One is the board's oversight of risk, and how it handles that can be a determinant in some organisations about their ability to move. Because one of the board's key roles is risk. It's not the first. Another is strategy, and we've talked about whether Red Cross, and I don't want to pick on Red Cross, there's all sorts of organisations struggling with this, has firmly decided this is one of the key planks in strategy or not. The third is choosing the CEO and the team, and performance managing those people. One thing I find very quickly is, and I'm a CEO, if there are things that are on my KPI list, I'm pretty keen to pass them on down the line. Now, if one of those things, I'm being purely hypothetical here, is breeding a culture of innovation or collaboration or anything else, then I'm going to be putting things in place to see that happens. But it's got to tie to a strategy. As we already said, clearly there's at least some people here who are passionate about this concept of enabling innovation. A final comment that relates to a few of those things is this. In a previous organisation where I was CEO, one of our key values was empowerment, which is not far from innovation. Our staff wanted to be empowered to get on with doing the job, in some cases in the way they saw that. And one of the discussions I had with them over a period of time was that genuine empowerment requires not an absence of framework and structure, but very clear framework and structure. And I think that's often one of the challenges in this quest for empowerment or innovation or any of those softer things is there are no rules. Actually, there's nothing more disempowering than heading off in the direction and being told, oh, you can't go there. You have to come back over here. Let's set the boundaries and say, now go play. And I think that's one of the keys, really.
Andrew's just giving me the 5-minute warning. Just a question up the back there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one observation, I guess throw a question up based on what Rebecca spoke about earlier around experience in CSIRO and trying to bring people together. Obviously, collaboration and communication is a key aspect of an organisation or people coming together to actually be innovative together. I'd have to say, from my time, limited time with Red Cross, having started last year, some of the most innovative times I've seen is when our computer system goes out and it actually forces people to get up from their desk and go and talk. And I remember the last time it happened for a couple of hours, I remember it was a Friday, people were up, and I went for a bit of a walk around the office, and I might have talked to you about this after, Helen, was listening to some of those conversations that people are having around the office. It really actually facilitated that ability for people to actually go and talk about new ideas, but also broke down barriers between teams as well, and actually people looking to work together. So I throw the question back up is, what other options and sort of innovative ideas around trying to bring people together to talk around, you know, new concepts, new ideas? And
There's 100 ideas. I think of that a bit like the Rubik's Cube example. Throw in something from outside. I've done innovation exercises where we've just picked a word off a random word list and say, okay, now we have to relate that to our strategy. And it might be rabbit burrow, you know. And it sounds stupid, but if you work at it long enough, something comes out. I've put project teams of different people together for a fortnight that aren't related to each other's jobs and say, okay, have a go at this. I love the computers going down one. I refused for many years as a corporate consultant to have a mobile phone, and I was the only one in the place that didn't. But it meant I was walking around a lot more. I think they're all good examples. Something from outside is one of the keys.
I think, Andrew, Rebecca's probably lived and breathed it with Street. Have you got a comment on that?
For me, it often comes when you get the most unlikely people together. So in a social enterprise context, you know, an organisation like ours, I've got 40 staff, 30 of which are baristas and chefs, and the others are youth workers and psychologists. So people who would normally never be in the same organisation together. And so for me, it's just how often can you cross-fertilise the ideas between those two groups? Because it's, you know, my job really is, I guess, almost trying to be the detergent so you don't get an oil and water mix. It's really easy for us. I think what Nick said, you stay in your isms. You know, you've got all of your little groups that just often don't cross-fertilise. So what are the ways that you're creating, you know, permission for that to happen? So people who just don't normally have a conversation, have a conversation.
So one more quick question. No, I have received an email question from Emma Newman, a staff member, in regards to Lucy Main, who was included as a keynote speaker at the summit here in environmentalism, and is more intrigued in regards to feeling strongly with environmental impact. And with Red Cross being a large leading organisation in Australia and the world, and the pressure on the government and its behaviour to that, the question was, where does that belong in the policy? And I suppose from an innovation point of view is, do the Red Cross workers need guidelines to be responsible, and how do they approach that for the world resource? And I think maybe the best way to direct that is to Nicholas. I'm basing on CVs.
Okay, so I think, one thing I can say is that there are lots of things that we have, one of the things that we've shown, I think, with the examples today, is there are lots of examples where there's inadequate attention to local knowledge. And do you know that there are also areas where the opposite is the case? So if you take, and this is important in the area of the environment, there are things in the environment that require lots of local knowledge. Land care is an example of that. Greenhouse gas emissions are not like that. They are, I mean, the questions of how you get emissions down in a particular place obviously require local knowledge. But the way we are going to solve the greenhouse problem, if we solve it, is solving a public good, a global public good. So if you imagine Australia taking on carbon, let's hope we will once again take on carbon pollution reduction commitments, and we say we will not emit more than, say, 400 megatons, by 2030, then if you can find a way to lower your emissions, that creates the ability for somebody else to increase their emissions. So there are aspects of this which require local knowledge, and if people want to feel part of the solution, they should go and maybe work in that way, and perhaps come up with new technologies which again lower the cost of doing this. But the actual task needs to be taken on as a public exercise. And as taking it on as a private exercise, there are better things you can do with your time.
Okay, thank you. I might just leave it, sorry, one last quick question. Oh, sorry, because we are restricted for time, but it was important to get these questions.
Thank you. Anyone on the panel can address this one. What is the relationship between innovation and setting clear goals?
Oh, I'll have a crack at that. Well, the Bristol Eye Hospital had a clear goal set for it by its government, and the clear goal was to lower waiting lists. And one way to lower waiting lists was to send out fewer reminders. And that increased blindness in Bristol. So it's easy to talk about setting clear goals. That's one of those managerial things. Managers feel good about it. They say, well, I'm setting clear goals. And of course we should set goals about all sorts of things. But setting goals isn't kind of the point. It's the felicity of the goals to what you're trying to do. It's with some knowledge of how goals can actually screw things up, how they need to be changed, and so on. So it's actually a close and kind of ecological relationship between the goals and the action. It isn't the manager as hero.
Rebecca?
Harvard Business Review had an article on setting clear goals that only 4% of people set goals for themselves and actually say them out loud. So I know from a personal perspective, there's something about taking it from being on your own piece of paper to actually putting it out there in public space and holding yourself accountable for it. And apparently the 4% of people who do set goals and do publicly put them out there are more effective than the 96% who don't. So the power of setting them and verbalising them is quite incredible.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring this to a close. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the variety and diversity of the expert panel members we had here today. Dr. Nicholas Gruen, thank you very much. Ms. Rebecca Scott, Peter Walton, and Dr. Andrew Young. I think there's pretty clear messages there that, you know, for the agenda for our organisation, and you know, the simplicity and logic of innovation is extraordinary how it's presented, but it is a matter of allowing everyone to provide their thoughts to make this organisation go forward for the future. So thank you very much.